A sudden shift in tone. After weeks of confrontation, Washington is now talking negotiation. Denmark confirms discussions with the United States on Greenland are back on track, with NATO now firmly in the room. What began as a territorial shock has evolved into a high-stakes Arctic security reset. For weeks, the message was blunt. Greenland mattered, and the United States wanted control. Now the language is different. Denmark's foreign minister confirms Washington is seeking a negotiated solution, restarting talks that had been frozen amid escalating rhetoric. The pivot comes just one day after President Donald Trump publicly backed off threats to seize the autonomous Arctic territory. The positive outcome of that meeting is that the American president, at least for the time being, can see the perspective in that, instead of these violent ideas about needing to own Greenland in order to control its own concerns, there is now a wish to negotiate a solution which is with the Kingdom of Denmark, but also a NATO angle. First, there was the president's speech at Davos, where he took the somewhat extreme idea of annexing Greenland off the table. That was good. And then there was the subsequent meeting with NATO's Secretary General, after which the trade war with Europe was called off, and he said, "Now I will ask the foreign minister and the vice president to negotiate a solution." We believe that we have agreements with the Americans that should make it possible to address their security concerns, which we also share. And we also have NATO, where Denmark, together with other Arctic coastal states, has worked to achieve a greater NATO engagement. And if you put all these things together, it should be possible to find a solution. But this requires that calm now be restored to this process. To date, we have only had one meeting with the Americans, which took place last week. It was a productive hour, during which we agreed to initiate a series of meetings. This has been on hold, but the positive outcome of Davos and the Secretary General's commitment is that we are now resuming these discussions. Within hours, the focus shifted to Brussels. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen agreed the alliance must step up its presence in the Arctic. Security in the region, they said, is no longer a bilateral issue. It's an alliance responsibility. Greenland, long a strategic outpost, is now framed as a collective defense concern. Concerned officials say NATO is considering a more permanent Arctic footprint, including around Greenland. While no formal mission has been launched, commanders confirm discussions are active. Behind the scenes, Denmark and the United States are also reviewing a decades-old defense pact governing American forces on the island. The message is clear: posture matters in the High North. President Trump confirms NATO will be involved in future Arctic defense planning, including cooperation on his proposed Golden Dome missile defense system. The plan could expand U.S. military infrastructure on Greenland, potentially integrating missile detection and interception assets. Trump insists allies will share costs and responsibility. The Arctic, once remote, is now central to missile defense strategy.
We're all going to work together, and actually NATO is going to be involved with us. We're going to be doing it in conjunction, parts of it in conjunction with NATO, which is really the way it should be. And we won't have any expense because we're not going to have expense. Other than building the Golden Dome, we're going to build the Golden Dome. And we'll have participation in that also. The cost of the Golden Dome, we'll have participation in that also, meaning with the expense of it. And we're building a Golden Dome, and you see the way it works. That is so much better for us and for Europe to have that piece of ice covered by the Golden Dome.
U.S. President Donald Trump has openly questioned NATO's commitment to America and floated a move never attempted before, invoking NATO's core security clause for U.S. border enforcement. What began as frustration over Greenland has now escalated into a fundamental challenge to the meaning of collective defense. U.S. President Donald Trump reignited tensions with NATO. this time by suggesting the United States should have invoked the alliance's most sacred clause, Article 5, to address illegal immigration at the southern border. In a Truth Social post, Trump said the U.S. missed an opportunity to put NATO to the test, arguing that an influx of undocumented migrants amounted to an invasion, language that would, in theory, trigger a collective military response under NATO rules. Article 5 is the foundation of NATO. It states that an armed attack against one member is considered an attack against all. It has been formally invoked only once, after the September 11th attacks on the United States. Applying it to border enforcement would represent an unprecedented reinterpretation of collective defense. Trump's remarks followed growing friction with European allies over his renewed push to acquire Greenland. At Davos, he argued that ownership, not leases or partnerships, was essential for Arctic defense, while accusing NATO of benefiting more from U.S. protection than it provides in return. The problem with NATO, Trump said, is we'd be there for them 100%, but I'm not sure they'd be there for us. The comment landed heavily in European capitals, already uneasy about Washington's direction.
We want strong allies, not seriously weakened ones. We want Europe to be strong. Ultimately, these are matters of national security, and perhaps no current issue makes the situation more clear than what's currently going on with Greenland. Would you like me to say a few words of Greenland? I was going to leave it out of the speech, but I think I would have been reviewed very negatively. I have tremendous respect for both the people of Greenland and the people of Denmark, tremendous respect. But every NATO ally has an obligation to be able to defend their own territory. And the fact is, no nation or group of nations is in any position to be able to secure Greenland other than the United States. We're a great power, much greater than people even understand. I think they found that out 2 weeks ago in Venezuela. We saw this in World War II, when Denmark fell to Germany after just 6 hours of fighting and was totally unable to defend either itself or Greenland. So the United States was then compelled, we did it, we felt an obligation to do it, to send our own forces to hold the Greenland territory. And hold it we did, at great cost and expense. They didn't have a chance of getting on it, and they tried. Denmark knows that. We literally set up bases on Greenland for Denmark. We fought for Denmark. We weren't fighting for anyone else. We were fighting to save it for Denmark. Big, beautiful piece of ice. It's hard to call it land. It's a big piece of ice. But we saved Greenland and successfully prevented our enemies from gaining a foothold in our hemisphere. So we did it for ourselves also. And then after the war, which we won it big. Without us, right now you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, perhaps. After the war, we gave Greenland back to Denmark. How stupid were we to do that? But we did it.
What happened? How did you manage to convince President Trump to U-turn on?
Well, again, this issue did not come up anymore last night, and I think what we discussed is the goal. What do we want to achieve? And his vision, when he was Trump 45, again with Trump 47, clearly leading the way. He is the leader of the free world. If he is worried about something, hey, we'd better listen, because then he might have found something which is not good. And that is this issue of the Russians and the Chinese getting more and more access, because the sea lanes are opening up. We know there are 7 Arctic countries in NATO. That's the US, because of Alaska, that's Canada, and then 5 in Europe. And the 8th one is Russia. And we don't want the Russians to get access to our part of the Arctic. Plus, we have China, which is not an Arctic country, but which is more and more active there in that region. So it's a sort of informal 9th Arctic member. And he was always clear on this. In my conversations with him, I think yesterday we focused on that aim, that goal. How can we prevent that from happening? And how can NATO collectively, under US leadership, as always, because the US is by far the biggest nation in NATO, And how can we do this? I would say to my colleagues in NATO, let's focus on what we have to focus on. Two things are crucial now. One is to implement the decisions at the summit in The Hague. The spending going up, equalizing with the US, getting the defense industrial base going. By the way, this is also an issue in the US, and the president is working hard on this, really ramping up defense production and getting to the CEOs of the big defense industrial companies to do that. And thirdly, of course, focusing on Ukraine. And let's not drop the ball when it comes to Ukraine, because we are so busy with all this other stuff. And on Ukraine, we need to make sure that they have what they need in terms of military support to sustain in the fight. Again, the US supplying large parts of that, paid for by European and Canadian allies. So that we have to keep focusing on.
Some people are describing you now as a Trump whisperer.
Nobody, Trump doesn't need whisperers. He needs...
But have you found a way and a strategy?
No,
calling
I don't.
him daddy, you spoke
Why
to
would
him
I need to find a
yesterday?
way if he's doing the right stuff? When it comes to NATO, he's doing the right stuff. When it is coming to the Arctic, he is focusing us on the right issue. So why do I have to whisper to anybody? He doesn't need that. Sometimes you have your debates, of course, within the chamber, within the room, and with European allies I have those discussions. But in the end, this is the strength of NATO. We always pull together. Article 5 is ironclad. The US is totally committed to the organization. They had one big irritant, one big pebble in the shoe, Europeans not paying up. That we solved in the Hague. I don't think the Russians and Chinese will be happy because what we are doing this week is coming together as NATO allies under American leadership, President Trump's leadership, to focus on protecting the Arctic region. I don't think the Russians and Chinese are happy. When you look at...
But with the language Donald Trump was using against the Europeans, you don't think that they look at that as a wedge is being created?
In NATO, you always will have your discussions. But that's the great thing about NATO. It is an alliance of democracy. So you will have your discussions. But the Russians and the Chinese know that we are one for all and all for one, that Article 5 is ironclad. An attack on one is an attack on all. There is no doubt.
Just hours after questioning NATO's reliability, Trump announced he had reached an initial framework for a Greenland-related deal involving NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, potentially granting the U.S. expanded access to mineral rights in the Danish territory. Trump framed the outcome as a win for all NATO members.
I think the trip was great. You had a lot of good response, even from the fake news. And I think Greenland's going very well. It's in negotiation. And I think what we did today was great. It was great. It's going to be a great board. That'll be a board, I think, like no other, right? That's a board like no other. Well, it's really in negotiation, but it's infinity. The time limit is infinity, meaning there is no time limit. It's forever. It's, you hear about 99 years, 50 years. It's forever. That was discussed. We can do anything we want. We can do military. We can do anything we want. And it's being negotiated, and let's see what happens. I think it'll be good. There's no price. There's no purchase price. We're all going to work together, and actually NATO is going to be involved with us. We're going to be doing it in conjunction, parts of it in conjunction with NATO, which is really the way it should be. And we won't have any expense because we're not going to have expense. Other than building the Golden Dome, we're going to build the Golden Dome. And we'll have participation in that also. The cost of the Golden Dome, we'll have participation in that also, meaning with the expense of it. And we're building a Golden Dome. You see the way it works. That is so much better for us and for Europe to have that piece of ice covered by the Golden Dome.